Okay, can I get us kicked off? Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Maura McDonald, Director of the Walton Family Foundation's Environment Program. And I want to open today with a little bit of a thought exercise. Did you know that the average work and cargo space on a commercial fishing boat is less than 100 square feet? That's pretty small when you think about the crew, all the gear you need for fishing, and storing the fish themselves. And that's before you factor in COVID and social distancing. There is not a lot of room on those vessels for fishers to stay 6 feet away from one another. Like everything else in our lives, the pandemic has had a profound effect on fishing and by extension on sustainable seafood. Here at the Walton Family Foundation, we see this change as an opportunity to step back and examine how sustainability can and should work. Some have said that with the pandemic and the economic crisis, sustainability can seem like a luxury. I have to say that I couldn't disagree more. First, we've just come too far and there's too much at stake to lose ground. And secondly, I firmly believe that we should never let a good crisis go to waste. You never know. This radical change might just give us the opportunity to find new solutions to protect the ocean, the species that call it home, and the communities that depend on it. Fish are an essential source of nutrition for more than 1 billion people around the world. They're the cornerstone of the ocean's food chain and the driver of hundreds of millions of jobs globally. With all this enormity in mind, I'm happy to welcome you here today to listen, learn, and explore what's changing, what needs fixing, and where there are opportunities to advance the sustainable seafood movement in the process. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Heather Diagnis, who will be moderating today's discussion. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Maura. Hi, everyone. I'm Heather Diagnis, and I'm the Acting Oceans Initiative Lead for the Walton Family Foundation, and I'm also a program officer overseeing our work in Indonesia. I'm really delighted to be moderating this conversation today, and I'd also like to welcome all of you for joining us for what I hope will be a really interesting conversation on the state of sustainable seafood, especially now during the COVID pandemic. We're really hoping that this can be a conversation, although this is a live event and I can't see any of you out there, I'm urging you all to participate when the time is right with questions. We've also received some questions in advance that we'll be incorporating into the conversation. Here at the Walton Family Foundation, we take a bait-to-plate approach to advancing sustainable seafood and fisheries. We build demand for sustainable seafood in key markets in the United States, the European Union, and Japan, and we complement this work by working with governments and suppliers and communities and fishers to manage their fisheries and supply the sustainable seafood that's needed to meet this demand. One of the driving principles of our work is that we believe that those closest to the problems are also closest to the solutions. And that's exactly who we'll be talking with today. I'm really pleased to be introducing our 3 panelists that we have for this conversation. The first is Enrique Alonso, and he is the Global Fisheries Director at Sustainable Fisheries Partnership, where he works across the seafood supply chain from fisher to supplier to buyer. Welcome, Enrique. We also have Sergio Castro, who is the founder of Del Pacifico Seafood, which is the only fair trade certified wild-caught shrimp company in the world sourcing from Mexico. Welcome, Sergio, and thank you for joining us. And finally, we have Danielle Leone, who is a renowned chef committed to sustainable seafood in her restaurant, the Breadfruit and Rum Bar in Phoenix, Arizona. Welcome, Danielle, and thank you all for participating today in what I hope will be a really exciting conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the first question and dive right into the conversation. And I'd like to ask each of you to answer the question, but also tell us a little bit more about yourselves, what you do, how you feel about sustainable seafood, and also why don't you tell us where you are in the world, since we're in this new world order of doing everything online from all over the world. So my first question is, I'm really excited that we've got 3 speakers who represent across the seafood supply chain. We've got Enrique, who can really tell us perspectives from the fishers, from the community, and also from throughout the supply chain. we have Sergio, who is a supplier himself and is very close to fishers who are catching wild-caught shrimp, and then a restaurateur. And what I'd like to ask each of you is, from your perspective, how do you see COVID affecting the sustainable seafood sector as a whole? And I think I'd like to ask Enrique to kick us off. Enrique?
Hello. Thank you for the invitation to participate in this event. My name is Enrique Alonso. I am an anthropologist by training. I have been working in fisheries for the last 17 or 18 years. I worked in Europe, mainly in Spain. I am Spanish, from Galicia, from the Northwest. I worked in Southeast Asia as well, mainly in Timor-Leste, but also in other countries in the region. And then I worked in Latin America, largely in Chile, Peru, Ecuador, Panama, and other countries in the region. I think this pandemic is bringing to the fore, is bringing light to many different processes. There has been disruption in the demand. There has been disruption from the production side. That has brought a whole new picture that has unveiled a lot of gaps and weaknesses, not only in the supply chain, but also in the sustainable seafood movement. But I think it brings along as well a great opportunity to innovate and bring new solutions to the table.
Thank you, Enrique. I like your optimism about innovation, and I hope we can dig into that more. Sergio, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and go next. Introduce yourself and let us know how you're seeing COVID affecting both your business as well as the seafood sector as a whole.
Hello, and thank you again for the invitation. I'm Sergio. I'm founder and CEO of the Pacifico Seafoods. We were founded in 2015 with our purpose as a company to supply certified sustainable seafood. And basically, what I can tell you from our perspective, our supply chain, we've been very lucky, with this pandemic. Mostly because the timing and the channel, where a product goes, which mostly goes to retail in Mexico and US. So as we all know, the retail channel, is having a high demand. So that has helped us, to substitute, or a smaller channel, which is food service. Also, when the pandemic came, our shrimps or fishing season was over. So we were not affected, in terms of, the capture. However, we're still processing value added. And in Mexico, which is where our processing plant is located, the government let us keep operating. However, we had to reduce the density of our plant. So obviously that affect our production cost. In general, for the seafood sector, I think, I don't have, rough numbers, but my understanding is that food service represents the bigger channel, in the world. And I know that's kind of the same case for Mexico, US, and Canada. So depending on the species, the percentage changes. I know shrimp, we're lucky in that part too, because it's only 50%, so there's a high demand of retail too, but there's some other species, that rely on food service, and in a higher percentage. So I'm sure, with the challenges, in processing that we share too, with the rest of the industry. And, I'm guessing that a lot of other companies in our industry, should be going through very difficult times.
Thank you, Sergio. I'm glad to hear that for you and for your segment of the shrimp industry, the impacts haven't been that bad to date, because that's not what you hear from other segments. So that's really great to hear. And I'm looking forward to digging into that more. Okay, Danielle, over to you. We're looking forward to hearing your perspective at the very end of the supply chain. What do you think the effects are of COVID on the seafood sector from your position and your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So being what seems to be the end user, first, I am the chef and co-owner of the Breadfruit and Rum Bar in Phoenix, Arizona. I stand in a very unique position. Not only am I an advocate for sustainable seafood within restaurants or helping chefs understand the value of sustainable seafood, I am also a champion of sustainable seafood who lives in the desert. So it can be difficult already for me to find what I need and to live what I believe. We have, over the past 12 years at the Breadfruit, have found our success in building a foundation built on sustainability. And we are known for offering sustainable seafood in the desert. Now, what's happened for us is since March 19th, we have decided to close down our restaurant. And with that, unfortunately, when we shut our doors, we also shut our doors not just to our community, meaning the people immediately in Phoenix, right? But we shut our doors to our fishing community, right? Also the people that are growing seafood responsibly. So the impact of a single restaurant shutting its doors, especially a restaurant that already embraces these values of, I'd say, more of just being a steward and having ownership over our planet, is that we have seen everybody else suffer around us. Focusing on stewardship is really key, and it continues to be our focus even though we are closed. So what I have seen is a lot of people that I've always worked with becoming quite creative. And what I mean by that is fishers, people that my people that have helped me find sustainable seafood across the nation have been looking to partner with me in different ways. So overall, we built this beautiful foundation based on sustainable seafood, and then that foundation was crumbling quickly below us. And we are full of grit in our industry, restaurateurs and fishers. We're used to being very savvy and working on low margins. And I see us all pivoting, and we're pivoting to have partnerships in new ways. I have people that perhaps don't have a home for their seafood that would like to give it to me so I can feed people in need in my community. That's really interesting. So seeing waste in a different way, or seeing how we can still stay relevant in the marketplace in a different way. So I've seen the sector struggle, whether it's the restaurant industry or our seafood industry. However, at the end of the day, I feel like we're learning how to be more resilient because of this crisis.
Thank you, Danielle. And I love that idea of seeing waste in a different way and seeing how we can really pivot that to helping our community. I think that is such a great message. I'd want to follow up, Enrique, on your statement about the sort of opportunities that these disruptions are presenting for us. So I'd like to pick up on that. You said that you are seeing disruptions in demand and in production. What do you think the industry can do? What are some of the opportunities that are presented now to the industry in terms of rebuilding after COVID in a way that can enhance sustainability?
Yeah, so building upon some of the points raised by Sergio, there have been some sectors, some seafood sectors that have been very much affected by the demand side. So mainly those that are dependent relying on the food service. So basically, octopus, for example, has hit very, very hard. Some other sectors were not so affected, the marine ingredient sector, the tuna sector, because they mostly go to the retail or the whitefish sector. There is, I mean, nowadays, the companies are trying to survive, the fishers are trying to survive. So we are in a time of emergency, basically. However, when you look at it from a historical perspective, the food service has been slower than the retail sector to engage into sustainability. So the retail sector was much more engaged. There is a longer tradition of engagement of the retail sector in sustainability. So there might be several processes here. During this pandemic, many of the processing plants, exporters, many companies in the supply chain who depended very much on the food service sector have tried to target the retail sector. There might be the progress towards sustainability might be obviously slower in those sectors and seafood, commodities that rely on the food service sector. But on the other hand, this movement of many supply chains towards the retail is making them move faster towards sustainability requirements and meeting what the retail sector is asking to them. In regards to opportunities, I think this pandemic has brought the attention to something that it was there, but it has been sharpened, which is inequality. Basically, we did a study in April at the beginning of the process in many of the fisheries we work with, and we soon realized that there is a big difference between those fisheries in countries where they operate in the formal economy, so they have secure tenure rights, they have licensing systems, they have management in place, and those fisheries that operate in the informal economy. And that these ones are 99% of the small scale fisheries in the developing world. I say 99, it's not 99, but it's a big percentage of the small scale fisheries in the developing world are in the informal economy. So as they are not in the numbers, they do not exist. And that means that when the states started to develop measures to release the pain, they were left out, they were left behind because they were not in the numbers. So I think this crisis is bringing to the attention that marginalization of small-scale fishers, mostly in the developing world. That is one, and that process of marginalization, the gap has been sharpened by this crisis. By all those operating in the informal economy. When you go to the opportunities, I think we need to change the paradigm totally in fisheries management globally. I mean, this global crisis has brought to the attention to the fact that traditional fisheries management is too expensive. It's too expensive and it's not efficient. Traditionally, in fisheries management, you have mostly all the countries, you have one central research institution that develops research for management, one central management institution that usually takes top-down decisions. That approach should be changed. Science is too expensive. Normally, these research institutions, they own the data, they do the science. We have to decentralize knowledge. This is what we have to do. We have to decentralize data gathering, develop cheap data gathering systems that can be operated by anyone. We have to develop open data sharing systems, full transparency, and so on and so on. We have to engage more and more other actors beyond the unique scientific research institution And we have to decentralize management as well. We have to make an effort to actually and genuinely integrate co-management in governance systems. We have as well to decentralize surveillance, not enforcement, but surveillance, yes. There are very effective and cheap ways to control IUU fishing, and we have to ensure that compliance is integrated in the supply chain. So this whole process requires a new engagement, a further level of engagement of the private sector in fisheries management. It requires a paradigm shift from all of us working on fisheries management. And it requires the state to have a stronger role, but a stronger role that is an orchestrating role, not them alone working unilaterally, but orchestrating what is happening and working more in collaboration.
Thank you, Enrique. I think that is really some good food for thought. So building on that, Sergio, I'm interested in your perspective on this, because what Enrique is saying is, let's change the paradigm. Let's get the supply chain more engaged and get the government to play a role where they are building collaboration and management across the sector, rather than being the research institute that tells you what to do. I'd like to hear your perspective on that, Sergio. Do you agree? And, is this something you've seen already in your fishery?
Yeah, I'm gonna be very simple, but I completely agree with everything that Enrique says. And actually that's something that most certification standards, are gonna require, for any supply chain to get, any certification label. But definitely I share his vision, and actually that's something that we as a supply chain, we are, that's where one of the biggest challenges are, like trying to get that information, that is centralized, in our case, in the Mexican Fisheries Institute. I have to say that we have seen a change, in the last couple of years, from the Mexican authorities. Actually, we finally were able, to sign a collaborative, agreement, in terms of sharing data, because we were investing in data analysis, as a company too, but obviously working together with the institute, it's going to help not only our supply chain but the rest of the fisheries in Mexico. That's that's why I completely agree with Enrique.
And let me add another question for you, Sergio. So one of the things Enrique also said was this inequality, sharpening the inequality, especially across the formal fisheries sector and the informal sector. Now, I know with the fair trade certification that you have, there are some benefits to fishers and communities. And I'm wondering if you've seen any benefits from the fair trade, especially now during the time of COVID. Have there been any sort of extra benefits that can help communities, especially those who are experiencing such problems because of this unequal effects of COVID?
Yeah, definitely it helps. It helps a lot. Actually, one of the, the main factors, that as a company we decide to, to go after the fair trade certification program, is that for us sustainability, it has to have, two elements: environmental and social, progress. Otherwise it's for us, it's not sustainable. That's the way we see it. That's kind of the values that we see. So definitely that's I don't think Enrique described that part very well, and it's something that we have seen, throughout Mexico. Something very, very clear, that you can see, and this is even before COVID. Once you see a fishery that that it's under a governance surveillance, it's at certain level of organization, like in this case was the blue shrimp fishery where we work. you know it's it's just a few steps to get certification, and something that the fair trade program has is that part of the premium that it's developed throughout the program, and that comes from the consumer paying some extra money, obviously, retailers, and it goes all the way down to the fishermen. Those funds are labeled, they have to be invested, in social, health, and obviously environmental programs, but also their condition that the fishermen, in this case, the co-ops, which is the legal organization that they work, in our area, they need to get training, in different types of management, and the funds, some they have a lot of independence in making their own decisions, but definitely the fair trade programs, we've seen a big improvement in the management, skills developed by those fishermen that start, the program, since year one, and definitely, it's a big help, for them, because they're better organized, they have funds, for this type of situation, and hopefully, more fishermen, decide or fisheries, decide to get better organized to receive all those benefits. As Enrique mentioned, there's a big portion of those, artisanal fishermen or small scale, fishermen that, they're not even, legal, so they're very, it's very tough for them, to not only to go to this pandemic, but just in general.
Thank you, Sergio. And I think that's a interesting point, that these are benefits that are not dependent on the pandemic at all. I mean, these are benefits to working with the small scale artisanal sector to improve their ability to participate and manage their own fisheries. Let me turn to Danielle real quick, and follow up as well as on something Enrique said. So Enrique pointed out that the big disruption has really been with the food service sector, which you're acutely familiar with, and you mentioned, and that has been a sector that's been slower to engage than the retail sector in terms of talking about sustainability, and that there is an opportunity now with COVID to engage better. And so, what would you like to see the food service or restaurant sector do differently so that sustainable seafood is really part of its DNA, just like it's part of your DNA?
Yes, this is something that I have been contemplating for years on end. And here in Phoenix, I dedicate, it seems like, my entire life, like my waking energy to this. And sometimes I dream about fish too. So what I want people to know, like my fellow restaurateurs across the nation or across this world, or chefs, is that, I think when there's crisis, we respond best to the people, the communities that we can see the greatest similarities to, right? Because we can empathize with what we know, right? You know what I mean? Like, I get that. I can feel what they're going through. What I've realized over the years is that fishers and chefs, we are in the same boat. Our stories, they run parallel. When I'm hearing Sergio, when I'm hearing Enrique talk, I feel like you can just be talking about the life of a chef. You're talking about the life of a restaurateur. You're talking about working conditions, close working conditions. We're talking about razor thin margins. We're talking about working so hard for such little economic return. And what we live on and what we thrive on is this knowing that we're doing what's right. And we're trying to make this world the place it should be, and making this world a place that we all deserve to live in. And so every day I'm showing up to work, or we're showing up to work, fishers and restaurateurs and chefs, and we're pouring our hearts out into our industry. We're not bankers. We're trying to change the world for the better, and we're doing it, with these interactions, one-on-one interactions. I mean, there's nothing more intimate than fishing. There's nothing more intimate than filling somebody's belly or offering them a seat at your table. And what has to happen is chefs and restaurateurs have to understand this parallel, that if we are going to survive, if we're going to continue to thrive even to the degree that we are today, we have to help everybody around us. We can't isolate ourselves. We can't worry about 50 cents per pound, 70, whatever it is, because we're trying to keep our doors open. That's not how you keep your doors open. You do it by supporting your community. My restaurant has been around for 12 years, and we opened in the middle of, 2008 was a terrible time to open any new business, especially a small business, because we're terribly underfunded. And we're here today because we care about our fishers and our farmers. I know them and I know what they deserve. When people try to charge me for fish, I know it's not enough, and I'll say something about it. How is it that I'm not paying enough for this fish? Or why is this fish so undervalued? Why? I mean, all white fish is a white fish. It's going to cook up the same. And what I'm seeing from my chefs is that there's this immense amount of insecurity that they're suffering from. And I need to keep my doors open, so I have to buy a specific fish only, and it has to come in this preparation because that's how I know how to prepare it. The shrimp has to be this size, and it has to be this color. And it's like, they don't realize the tremendous power we have. People eat what we put on their plates. If all chefs, if all restaurateurs said, I'm only buying these wild fair trade shrimp from Sergio, I know it's coming from Enrique, I know what's right. If that was on our menu, that means everybody in Phoenix would have to eat it. Everybody across the nation would have to eat it. And if we're thinking about community beyond what's at our doorstep, we have to, right? Our community is not Phoenix here. It's my nation. It's my world. It's all at my doorstep these days. That means you have to support the people that are doing it well. And if we all supported that, then it would have this beautiful cascading effect. I'm working with chefs to help them understand, I don't know, how to have more confidence, like how to put a whole fish on a menu and do it with like this resolute kind of confidence that your diner is going to eat this. And they're looking to us to tell them what's right. I think that's really the key. It's just like this simple switch in mentality. And I think people are afraid because we're coming from such a place of scarcity because our margins are so thin. But I think it's through this confidence and solidarity that we will all have a better quality of life. So Sergio was talking about fair trade, and he said sustainability isn't just ecological, it's social. You can't have one without the other. And they come together. And I know we're all trying to survive, but we do drive industry standards. And so how do we convince everybody to do it? Well, what I've been doing is just trying to lead by example. And I think we have such a detachment from our food, even as chefs or restaurateurs. I know we order the food, but somebody else is ordering the food, and then somebody else is ordering the food. How many chefs are actually ordering straight from their fisher or straight from their farmer? And that's a whole supply chain issue that we're not keeping more of our seafood inside of our countries even, because I think we have much more security at the end of the day. And if there is another disaster like COVID, another crisis, then we will be able to keep feeding ourselves and supporting our local fishers. I think that's really a part of it. And I know small fishers got left behind in this crisis, but you know what? Small restaurants got left behind too. We all got left behind. That PPP money was not for me. That was not for small businesses. If you made over $2 million a year, you probably didn't see that money for PPP. So, I mean, we are constantly marginalized. It was before COVID. And I think it has incensed us. I mean, we are sick of this. We're sick of not getting what we deserve. And I'm sick of seeing my world being decimated because people are oblivious or greedy. And at the end of this, I think it's going to be really hard for people to turn a cheek and say that stewardship is an option. You cannot opt out of stewardship. You can't opt out of owning yourself. You have to own yourself and your decisions. So as a chef, I want to work with shrimp that weren't treated with chemicals or fish that came from a small fisher. I want those products. I want to support you. I want the variability in size and shape. I don't care if there was a storm and I can't get fish. At my restaurant, when I don't have a menu item, we are beaming. You know what? They couldn't go out today. Nope, that's not, you know what we do have? We have this other fantastic item and it came from this fisher and this is what it tastes like and this is how I made it. And we say it with such glee like this that people are just like, yeah, okay, sure. They're like, what's wrong with you? Like, how are you not upset that you're out of food today? I'm not out of food. I just know there's seasonality and there's, variability in quantity and availability and size. So we have a lot of the same working conditions. We talked about having a hard time processing because of COVID. My restaurant's still shut down today because we have processing issues. My kitchen is so tiny that if somebody walks by, you squeeze and you probably apologize because you brushed by, So we're working in cramped quarters as it is. And I could never ask my kitchen or my team to also wear a mask. You can't breathe. It's a million degrees, it seems like, in a kitchen. There's no way you're going to stay sanitary. I mean, people do this constantly with their masks and they touch stuff. Like, I can't expect people to stay safe and still process food at this point. But it also points to the working conditions that we struggle with every day. So forget about COVID and that issue. That's something that I'm expected to deal with every day and still give you this incredible dining experience and still give you the best food. And it's just, it can be easier for us. The problem is that it's never going to be easier if you have to leave it up to me to do it or Enrique or Sergio to do it. Because we're too small. I mean, together we can make a change, and we always say that. But at the end of the day, it comes down to making sure that there's a mandate. Our world, our country has to demand that people are being treated fairly, and we are getting fair wages, and we have good working conditions. We are the country, we are the people. So how can we ignore us? At the end of the day, it doesn't make any sense for me at all. So I just think that it can be cost prohibitive for people to have, I don't know, Sergio was talking about fair trade and compliance, or even Enrique. And, I have farmers, for example, that aren't organically certified, but I know how she grows her crops and I know how she harvests them. And so I buy from her, even though she's not organic certified, but I'm landlocked and most of my country is. So how do I know that what I'm getting from Enrique or Sergio is what I want to support or sell? Well, it just makes sense that if we want the world or the country to thrive, that we have this as a government service. The government has to step up and provide us what we need. And it's like Sergio was talking about when he was fair trade certified, how he saw management skills increase. And I know for me in a small restaurateur, we're very much like fishers in that same sense, where we're lacking management skills too. It's very analog in my world, just like it is in their world. A lot of things is still written on paper or an Excel spreadsheet or a Google Doc. And how can we come together and fix everything if we're still writing stuff on paper? We are doing our best. But at the end of the day, it can be cost prohibitive. And it's something that we need support. We need support from somebody bigger than us. But I know there are legions of us on every part of the supply chain that are here to make this difference and to speak up for it. And I will spend the rest of my life advocating for this. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. That is great. I love that analogy, thinking of sort of you at one end of the supply chain and the fisher at the other, but really there's not that much difference. And I think that's really eye-opening for me. And I think you're exactly right that there is a lot of uncertainty at both ends. And it's the role of government, you could even say philanthropies and other funders, to really support what we can to improve the conditions, the sustainability, and the equity issues that both are struggling with. I want to take a pause here because we've got about 10 minutes left, and just let everyone who's listening know that if you'd like to, you could post a question in the chat box, and those will be fed to me, and I'll try to ask them. We have about 15 minutes left. And while you're doing that, I'm going to ask the panelists a few questions that were submitted ahead of time, and thanks to those of you who did submit these. And I think this question builds off of Danielle's statement just now really nicely. One of our participants said, sustainability kind of feels like a privilege right now, which I think you would disagree with, Danielle. So the question is, how do you balance your mission for a more environmentally sustainable seafood industry with keeping seafood consumers and workers safe and nourished? So let me ask Enrique first to see, or actually, let me see who feels strongly and would like to answer that question. Let me open it up to any of you.
I can kick off. Well, sustainability should not be a privilege. Sustainability should be, everybody should have the right to operate sustainably. We have to build a more inclusive, sustainable seafood movement. We have to ensure that the systems are inclusive. We cannot forget that this is not about having a small land plot and reducing the pesticides that we use. Fisheries require very complex science, so data, science, analysis. It requires management. It requires management systems, governance systems in place, and it requires enforcement. So having a sustainable fishery is not cheap. I mean, and the states have the mandate to do it. 90% of the times they do not have the funding, they don't have the money to do it. So my point before, and going back to that, we have to build cheaper fisheries management, science systems, and monitoring, control, and surveillance, so that we are able to be more inclusive. We should open the door for sustainability to many more people.
Thank you, Enrique. Sergio or Danielle, would you like to add anything?
I would like to add that, I think some of the big players, in the food service and retail channels, they are already raising, their seafood standards. That's, I think, we're heading toward that direction. And I think with this, the whole industry is gonna be heading that way. Of course, we all would like to see it, way faster. And I have to agree again with Enrique. Sustainability. At least with our experience, in wild caught shrimp, is not cheap. I completely agree. And however, once you the problem that for example we had on the early days, with food service, is that we need more Daniels out there, you know, and for example, our food service clients, you know, that they will pay, you know, for products. They were forced to buy that type of shrimp. You know, big organizations, because they changed the standards, you know, and I have to say, one of our first food service clients was Disney, you know, in the California parks, you know, and they can afford it, you know, and they can, that's an easy, okay, it seems very easy, you know, and all those big companies are the ones who are raising the standard, you know, and that's happening, you know, and there's some great job, you know, in the food service independent restaurants too. You know, there's, you know, definitely we need more people like Danielle and among other chefs that we work with too. You know, however, I understand it's not easy. It's not easy because it's a small operations, smaller margin. We're in the same boat, you know, we were, you know, when we were founded as a company, that was our mission, that was our purpose. So obviously, you know, we planned for that. You know, we knew it's not gonna be easy on the early stage, and you're gonna be taking, you know, big financial hits on the early stage, because get to those bigger accounts, you know, or either retail or food service, you know, it's not going to happen, you know, in months. It takes years, you know, and so it's the way we should see it is that the seafood standard should be raised, you know, to that sustainability level, you know, and it's a very tough job to do, you know, especially after situations like with the pandemic, you know, when definitely, you know, the economy is not going to be back, you know, to where it was. So people need to, you know, to look at their budget, and so it's not easy, but definitely, you know, I like to be positive, and in additional case, we're seeing it. You know, we're seeing it. You know, the last couple of years, you see more and more, you know, hotels, you know, in Mexico, they raise it to standard. Now I had about 50% of certified seafood. Otherwise, you know, and we have different you know, clients that even in Mexico, in the retail segment, you know, first we didn't thought we had a chance here, and we were surprised, you know, that you know, pretty much now we are, you know, we are having the same prices people paying in Mexico and in the U.S. and the volumes are being you know, way higher than we expect. You know, so definitely, you know, that there's good deals out there. You know, it's not easy and expensive, as Enrique says, and it's very difficult to a lot of independent restaurants, you know, to see it. But if there's more people like Danielle with that vision, you know, because there's a lot of consumers out there that they see value on it, you know, but it's hard, you know, you need to tell the stories, it's not as simple as just paying extra dollar for a pound of shrimp and charging, you know, more, you know, it's hard. That's my, you know, my opinion on that point.
Thank you, Sergio. And I think building on that, we got a question from an audience member that I'm going to, I think this builds to your point as well, Sergio, that I'm going to ask Danielle, and then we'll go into a closing question. So this is from someone in the audience from the Environmental Defense Fund who's in DC, and they've said, when are you planning to open a restaurant in DC? Which, by the way, I also received a lot of other here's while you were speaking. But I think there's also a broader question here, which is how can consumers, you know, I think those of us who are consumers and who want to support restaurants and yours, how can we make sure the people have access to that? I mean, you know, those of us who aren't in Arizona and who can't eat at your restaurant, what can we do? How can we find these restaurants and support them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I get asked that constantly. It's like, you say all these things, but like, how do I actually experience this myself, right? So let's see, we were just talking about needing like more of me across the nation, right, or the world. And it just so happens that there are, okay? So I'm not alone in this. And Tim, I do love DC, but I'm probably not coming anytime soon. So there are a few groups that I work with. I work closely with the James Beard Foundation. It's a culinary nonprofit that works with chefs and has an awesome impact program for sustainable seafood. And you can see through their list, you can see Smart Catch. It's called Smart Catch. We're all listed. You can go to Smart Catch from the James Beard Foundation website, and you'll have a national map. So you can find whoever is participating. And I'm a leader in that program, and there's plenty of leaders across the nation. That's meaning we are buying at least 90% green listed seafood by the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch program. Okay, so there's a lot of us there. Another easy way to find chefs like me and restaurants like me, I just mentioned the Monterey Bay Aquarium. They have a chef advocacy arm called the Blue Ribbon Task Force. And the Blue Ribbon Task Force is made up of culinarians all across the nation that are just as passionate as I am and have restaurants, multiple restaurants too. So you can find us that way. And I mean, the honest, easiest way is to do like a Google search, like seafood, sustainable seafood, Phoenix, Arizona. And then usually some people will pop up. I would pop up if you Googled me like that. So you would definitely find us. And that's like the easiest, obvious ways. And there are chefs we were talking about earlier, how insecure they are in general, right? Just trying to keep afloat. And so they might be making good decisions, proper purchasing decisions, right? But they're not flaunting it. It's not on a Google search. They're not an advocate, so you can't find them. But it is really so very important that you ask. Wherever you eat, please just ask. If you're going to go for a fish taco, ask them where the fish came from. You have to start this conversation. We have to start creating consumer demand for it. I do it. I go into a taco shop and it's like, I'm going to have your fish taco. Where'd it come from? And the girl at the register is just like, you know how that goes. And they ask, and then they ask, and somebody asks, and then they might kind of know. But then I'll go back 2 weeks later, and you know what? They knew just a little bit more. And it's crazy. And I'll get a Facebook or like an Instagram. They're like, were you in my taco shop earlier? That had to be you. Yeah, I was asking about your fish. But I've impacted their decision. So that happens at my restaurant too. People might not come in because they know I'm a sustainable seafood restaurant. I have a rum bar. People come in to drink, right? So they might come in for an amazing mojito and then they want a snack and I don't know, they're getting pepper shrimp and they'll just ask like, what does this shrimp mean? Like what's a selva shrimp or what's a desert sweet shrimp? Because these are brands they're not knowing. One comes from Arizona and one is grown really far away in the mangroves, right? So, and they have their own merits in different ways. So please just ask. And if you don't know if there's a sustainable seafood option, there will be if you let them know that you want it on the menu.
Thank you, Danielle. I know that what you just said will be music to some of my colleagues' ears who are always telling everyone they know, please ask every time you go to a restaurant where that fish is from. So I think with that, an hour sure does go real quick. And I would really like to thank our fabulous speakers, Enrique, Sergio, and Danielle. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights and everything that you shared with us. This was a really great conversation. I wish we had more time, and maybe we will in the future. And I'd like to thank everyone who's online as well for joining us today. And we're really looking forward to continuing this discussion online. So those of you who can, please follow us on Twitter and tag us, and we can continue to have this conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
And have a good afternoon, everyone.
You too. Thanks.